Go on, then. Clara Julian Thorne murmured his voice, a venomous caress against her ear, thick with the anticipation of her utter humiliation. The spotlight beckons. Try not to disappoint them too much. A wave of suppressed, cruel laughter rippled from where his friends Tristan and Blake eagerly watched their champagne flutes poised for a toast to her inevitable failure. The air in the opulent ballroom crackled heavy with the silent, mocking expectation of hundreds of eyes. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, the roar of her own pulse deafening. Then a single shaky breath. When she spoke, her voice, though quiet, sliced through the charged silence with an unexpected edge of steel. I will sing. The words hung in the air, a fragile shield against a tidal wave of contempt. What unfolds when a voice, long silenced by hardship, finally dares to break free in a room expecting only a fool? We invite you to share your feelings for Clara in this pivotal moment in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe, because the performance that follows is one you truly won't want to miss. The Thorne legacy was etched in granite and gold in sweeping New York skylines and hushed old money estates that sprawled across acres of unnaturally green lawn. Julian Thorne, the heir to this empire, moved through his world with the languid grace of a man Montagnais had been moved for since birth. He was 28, devastatingly handsome, in a way that seemed almost a prerequisite for his tax bracket, yet a profound, almost invisible boredom clung to him like the scent of his expensive cologne. His days were a carefully curated procession of obligations he mostly delegated, and pleasures that had long since lost their savour. His closest companions, Tristan Vance and Blake Hamilton, were cut from the same shimmering, expensive cloth. This afternoon, they were draped over the bespoke Italian leather sofas in Julian's penthouse eyrie of glass and steel that offered a god's-eye view of Central Park. Their conversation, as usual, was a masterclass in trivialities. It's an absolute travesty, Julian, a travesty. Tristan declared, his voice a dramatic baritone that belied the subject matter. He gestured with a hand weighed down by a watch worth more than a small car. The new yacht. They say another week. A whole week. My therapist says I need to manage my expectations. But honestly, how much can one man endure? Blake, ever the pragmatomist in their gilded trio, nodded sagely. You should have gone for the obsidian finish, Tris. My guy says it's got better. You know, nautical feng shui. Avoids these delivery snafus. He then turned to Julian, a sly grin playing on his lips. Speaking of avoiding snafus, Thorne the Foundation Gala is next Saturday. Your esteemed father Charles expects your charming presence, and more importantly, a suitably impressive date. Another supermodel, or perhaps an obscure European princess this time. Julian swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, the ice clinking a lonely rhythm. An idea cold and sharp began to form in the vacant spaces of his afternoon. Neither, he said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. I have someone far more unique in mind. Elsewhere in the vast, silent expanse of the Thorne mansion, down corridors that echoed with the ghosts of past galas and whispered power deals, Clara Moreau moved with a quiet efficiency that rendered her almost invisible. She was a shadow in a world of blinding light, her days a metronome of dusting priceless antiques that were never touched, polishing silver that only reflected the emptiness of the rooms, and ensuring the Thorne household ran with the seamless perfection Julian and his father Charles took entirely for granted. Her dark hair was always pulled back severely, her uniform immaculate, her expression carefully neutral. But behind the calm facade, a different Clara lived, a Clara who hummed melodies older than memory while she worked her voice a ghost of a sound rich and achingly pure. Sometimes polishing the grand piano in the disused music room, an instrument Charles Thorne hadn't allowed anyone to play since his wife's passing years ago. Her fingers would hover millimeters above the ivory keys, a silent longing in her touch. Another crisis today. She'd think her mind a private stage for her dry, observational humor as she overheard snippets of the Thornes' world. The charity auction is short on authentic 16th century tapestries. Perhaps I should suggest they auction off one of Mr. Julian's existential crises. Instead, I'm sure the bidding would be fierce. Her current existence was a world away from the life she'd once known, a life filled with music, with laughter, with the scent of her mother's Provençal cooking. There had been a small, sun-drenched apartment in a less gilded part of a European city, a father who whistled opera tunes off-key, but with infectious joy, and a younger brother, Leo, whose laughter was her favorite song. Clara herself had been the songbird, her voice a gift so rare it had promised a future on the grand stages of the world. A scholarship to a prestigious conservatory had been her golden ticket. Then came the rain-slicked night, the screech of tires, the shattering silence that followed. Her parents gone. Leo, her bright, vibrant. Leo left with legs that would never again carry him without the aid of steel and leather, his medical needs a relentless crushing weight. The scholarship, the dreams, the music. All had been sacrificed on the altar of necessity. She'd traded arias for aprons, applause for the silent nod of a job well done. Leo was her world now. Every cent she earned, every sacrifice she made, was for him. The Thorne Foundation Gala. Clara knew it well. Every year it was a whirlwind of extra duties, of frantic preparations, for an event she would only witness from the periphery, a silent cog in a glittering machine. This year, however, was about to be different. Later that evening, Julian, Tristan, and Blake were in Julian's private study, the air thick with expensive cigar smoke, and the self-congratulatory laughter of men who had never known a consequence. "It's genius, Julian. Pure, unadulterated genius," Blake was saying, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Taking the little Moreau chit, what's her name, Clara? Taking her to the gala. As your date," Tristan chimed in. "The looks on their faces, old Lady Ainsworth will probably swallow her diamonds. And your father, Julian Charles, will have an apoplectic fit, discreetly, of course, behind his starched collar." Julian leaned back, savouring the image. "It's not just a date, my friends. It's a plot, a statement, a meticulously crafted piece of social theatre. 50,000 says she doesn't last an hour before she begs to go home." He wasn't just betting on her discomfort. He was betting on her humiliation, a spectacle to alleviate his chronic ennui. The cruelty was the point, "You're on," Tristan said instantly, the thrill of the wager lighting up his eyes. "This will be legendary. The maid at the Millionaire's ball." In the hallway just outside the heavy oak door of the study, Clara Moreau stood frozen a tray with a forgotten decanter of brandy in her hands. She had been on her way to deliver it, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the plush Persian runner. Every word, every syllable of their venomous little plot had reached her ears, each one a tiny, poisoned dart, lodging in her heart. Her first instinct was to flee, to retreat into the shadows where she belonged. The heat of shame rose in her cheeks, a bitter, familiar taste. They were talking about her life, her dignity, as if it were a plaything, a bauble to be dangled and then crushed for their amusement. But then something else stirred within her, something buried deep beneath years of quiet endurance and sacrifice. A flicker of defiance, cold and sharp as Julian's earlier smile. Her hand tightened on the silver tray, the metal cool against her suddenly clammy skin. They thought her a mouse, a non-entity. They thought they could break her. A dangerous, desperate idea began to take root in the fertile ground of her pain. If they wanted a spectacle, perhaps she would give them one they would never forget. Not as a victim, but as something else entirely. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, a wild, impossible melody beginning to form in the silence of her stunned heart. The Thorn Foundation Gala. It was no longer just another night of servitude. It was a stage, and Clara Moreau, the hidden songbird, felt a tremor of something she hadn't felt in years, a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. The plot was set. But whose plot would truly unfold? The next morning, Julian Thorne summoned Clara Moreau to the sun-drenched breakfast room, a space usually reserved for the Thorne family's infrequent and often strained meals together. He was lounging in a high-backed chair, a newspaper artfully neglected, beside a plate of untouched fruit. He didn't look up when she entered, a small courtesy he rarely afforded the staff. "Clara," he began, his voice smooth as a well-aged bourbon. "I find myself in need of a companion for the Foundation Gala on Saturday." He paused, allowing the silence to stretch to underscore the utter improbability of what he was about to say. "I've decided you will accompany me." He finally lifted his eyes, expecting to see a Cinderella-esque flutter of disbelief, perhaps even gratitude, or more deliciously, the stammering confusion he and his friends had envisioned. Instead, Clara simply met his gaze, her own dark eyes unreadable. There was a stillness about her, a profound composure that was almost unnerving. "As you wish, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice even betraying nothing of the turmoil that had raged within her throughout the sleepless night. No shock, no fawning, no fear. Just a quiet, level acceptance. Julian felt an unexpected flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Annoyance, intrigue. It was as if a perfectly predictable puppet had momentarily twitched with its own volition. He dismissed it. She was, after all, just the maid. "Excellent," he said, a little too sharply. "My assistant will arrange for your accoutrements. Be ready by 7. The accoutrements arrived in a flurry of expensive boxes and hushed efficiency later that week. A renowned stylist, a woman named Madame Evangeline, who usually dressed duchesses and divas, descended upon Clara's modest staff quarters with an air of barely concealed martyrdom. Her team fluttered around Clara, measuring, pinning, and occasionally sighing with the dramatic flair of artists faced with a particularly challenging canvas. One would think Clara mused internally, as Madame Evangeline critically assessed her simple, clean features, that I was being prepared for a royal coronation rather than a public sacrifice. At least the lighting in here is too dim for her to notice the patch I sewed on my old cardigan this morning. Madame Evangeline, with a sigh that could curdle cream, finally selected a gown of sapphire silk. It was a magnificent creation, designed to shimmer and flow with a life of its own. When Clara finally stood before the full-length mirror, even she was taken aback. The woman staring back was a stranger. Elegant, poised, her usually severe features, softened by artfully styled hair and subtle makeup. The dress clung and cascaded in all the right places, a whisper of impossible glamour. Well, Madame Evangeline conceded a hint of surprise in her professionally bored tone. The raw materials are better than anticipated. Minimalist, one might say. But the gown magnifique does most of the heavy lifting, non. She adjusted a fold of silk. Now for the shoes. These are not, I repeat, not for navigating the service stairs, chérie. Think ethereal gliding. As if your feet are too good for the floor. Clara managed a small, polite nod, her mind racing. Ethereal gliding. With these heels, I'll be lucky if I don't execute an unintentional plié straight into the canapé tray. Perhaps I should have worn my sensible work shoes and claimed it was avant-garde. This wasn't a fairy tale transformation. It was the donning of a costume for a role she hadn't auditioned for in a play designed for her humiliation. Yet a tiny stubborn spark within her refused to be entirely extinguished. If she had to play a part, she would play it on her own terms, however small. Julian, meanwhile, was thoroughly enjoying the prelude to his social theatre. Tristan and Blake were in constant contact, their texts and calls filled with gleeful anticipation. Heard the stylist actually manage to make her look presentable, Tristan had texted, accompanied by a string of laughing emojis. Can't wait to see the masterpiece, old boy. This is your chef d'oeuvre of social sabotage. Julian had merely smiled. The game was proceeding beautifully. Even his father, Charles Thorne, had raised a questioning eyebrow when Julian casually mentioned his unconventional choice of companion for the gala. Charles hadn't commented further his disapproval, a silent, weighty presence that Julian usually chose to ignore, but this time it added a certain zest to the proceedings. Saturday evening arrived cloaked in the crisp air of early autumn. The Thorne Foundation Gala was being held at one of Manhattan's most opulent hotels, a palace of marble and gold. As Julian's limousine purred to a stop before the grand entrance, Clara took a steadying breath. The borrowed diamonds at her throat felt cold against her skin. Julian offered her his arm with a theatrical flourish, his eyes glittering with amusement. "Ready for your debut, Clara?" She placed her hand lightly on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. "As I'll ever be, Mr. Thorne. Mr." The moment they stepped into the grand ballroom, a hush fell, quickly followed by a ripple of whispers that spread through the glittering assembly like wildfire. Heads turned, champagne flutes paused midway to painted lips, and 1,000 unseen judgments were passed in an instant. Clara could feel the stares, sharp and dissecting, stripping away the borrowed silk and diamonds, trying to find the maid beneath. Who is she? Is that Thorne's new charity case? Darling, he wouldn't, or would he? It's so delightfully. Scandalous Julian, of course, basked in the attention, his smirk firmly in place. He guided Clara through the throng, deliberately pausing near groups of his acquaintances, the puppet master enjoying the reactions to his prize. Then came Genevieve Ainsworth, the evening's formidable hostess, draped in emeralds, and an aura of unimpeachable authority. Her eyes, sharp as shattered ice, swept over Clara from head to toe. "Julian, darling," she cooed her voice like chilled velvet. Always one for the unexpected. A bold statement, to be sure. "Is this your latest protégé?" The word hung in the air, laden with unspoken derision. Before Julian could reply, Tristan Vance and Blake Hamilton materialized, their faces alight with poorly concealed glee. "Well, well," Thorne Tristan boomed a little too loudly. "You actually did it. And Clara, isn't it? You clean up surprisingly well. Almost look like you belong." His attempt at wit landed with the subtlety of a dropped anvil. Blake snickered. "Don't get too comfortable with the champagne, dear. Wouldn't want you developing a taste for it. Back to tap water tomorrow, eh?" The air crackled with their smug amusement. Julian watched, a connoisseur of cruelty, waiting for Clara to crumble, to show the first signs of the humiliation he had so carefully orchestrated. But Clara Moreau didn't crumble. She stood a little straighter, her chin lifted, a serene, almost regal calm settling over her features. She turned her gaze slowly first to Genevieve Ainsworth, then to Tristan and Blake. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the surrounding chatter. "Madame Ainsworth," she said, her tone perfectly respectful. Mr. Thorne has been kind enough to offer me a unique perspective on this evening's festivities. She then looked directly at Tristan, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but held a universe of knowing. And you, Mr. Vance, are quite right. Appearances can indeed be surprising. Finally, she addressed Blake, her voice still soft, yet carrying an unexpected weight. Actually, Mr. Hamilton, I find that a person's true character is often revealed not by what they drink, but by how they choose to speak to others, especially those they perceive to be without a voice. A beat of stunned silence followed. Genevieve Ainsworth's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction higher. Tristan and Blake exchanged uneasy glances, their smirks faltering. Even Julian felt that same unfamiliar prickle of surprise. The maid, it seemed, had a script of her own, and the first act was far from over. The ripple of unease created by Clara's quiet, dignified responses was short-lived. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice like oiled silk and an overly enthusiastic smile, soon took to the stage. After a lengthy preamble about the Thorne Foundation's unwavering commitment to uplifting the artistic spirit, he announced a special unscheduled addition to the evening's entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed his voice, echoing slightly in the vast ballroom tonight. We have a unique opportunity, a chance for one of our very own guests to share their hidden talents, all in the name of philanthropy. A spontaneous offering, if you will. A polite, if somewhat bewildered murmur went through the crowd. This was not on the program. Before anyone could quite process this, Tristan Vance, seeing his chance to reignite their cruel game, raised his champagne flute. Well, in that spirit, he called out his voice, carrying an edge of malice, I nominate. Julian Thorne's charming companion. Surely she must have a delightful little parlour trick to share, Blake Hamilton immediately seconded. Bravo, Tristan. An excellent suggestion. Let's see what hidden depths the lovely Clara possesses. Don't be shy, my dear. The spotlight, figurative and then literal, swung towards Clara. 100 pairs of eyes, a mixture of cruel expectation, detached curiosity, and a very few tinged with a nascent sympathy, pinned her in place. Julian Thorne, standing beside her, felt a surge of triumph. This was it, the culmination of his plot. He leaned in his breath, warm against her ear, his voice a silken whisper of pure condescension. Well, Clara, the stage awaits. Don't disappoint your adoring public. Might as well give them a show. He fully expected her to stammer an excuse, to blush and shrink, perhaps even to flee in tears. That was the script. A show Clara thought a cold fury, mixing with a strange, reckless calm. They want a show. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The years of suppressed dreams, of silent grief, of shouldering burdens far too heavy for her slender frame, pressed down on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their amusement, their utter disregard. This was the precipice. She could fall, or she could fly. She remembered her mother's hands, gentle on her face, after Clara had sung her first solo at a local festival, her voice, then untrained, but filled with a child's pure joy. Sing from here, ma chérie, her mother had whispered, touching Clara's heart. Always from here. That is where the truth of music lives. She thought of Leo, of his unwavering belief in her, even now, even when she had long given up on herself. She thought of the sacrifices, the endless, wearying days, and she thought of the casual, unthinking cruelty of the man beside her. Something within Clara Moreau snapped, or perhaps it finally irrevocably clicked into place. She turned to Julian, and for a fleeting second he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not fear, not subservience, but a flash of indomitable will as bright and hard as a diamond. "Very well, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her pulse roared in her ears. She then addressed the room, her gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. "I will sing." A stunned silence descended. Then a few scattered disbelieving chuckles. Tristan and Blake exchanged a look of pure, unholy glee. "This is going to be even better than we thought," Tristan mouthed to Blake, who was already fumbling for his phone, no doubt, to capture the impending disaster. "She'll probably croak out, 'Happy birthday,' and call it a night as stagehand." Looking bewildered, quickly arranged a microphone at the center of the small stage, normally occupied by the string quartet. The orchestra members, who had been on a break, looked at each other with a mixture of confusion and professional apprehension. Clara walked towards the stage, each step feeling both impossibly heavy and strangely light. The borrowed sapphire gown shimmered around her, no longer a costume of humiliation, but a silken armor. The stage lights were blinding, momentarily erasing the sea of faces before her. She took a deep, shaky breath, closed her eyes, and found her center, that quiet, sacred space where the music had always lived dormant, but never truly dead. And then she sang. The first note hung in the air, a single perfect pearl of sound, pure, resonant, impossibly beautiful. It was an old Italian aria, a lament of lost love and enduring hope, something her mother used to hum. The scattered chuckles died, instantly choked, in a collective gasp. Tristan's phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered unnoticed to the floor. Blake's jaw went slack. Clara's voice, a rich, classically trained soprano, soared through the vast ballroom, filling every corner, every crevice with its heartbreaking beauty. It was a voice that didn't belong in the servants' quarters, a voice that didn't belong to a charity case or a joke. It was a voice that belonged in the great opera houses of the world. Each note was imbued with a lifetime of emotion, the joy of her childhood, the shattering grief of her loss, the quiet desperation of her daily struggles, the fierce protective love for her brother, and now a soaring, defiant reclamation of her soul. The technique was flawless, honed by years of secret practice in stolen moments, but it was the raw, unvarnished emotion that clawed at the hearts of every single person in that room. As she sang, the opulent ballroom seemed to fade. Instead, she saw her mother's smiling face, her father's proud tears as he listened to her practice. She saw Leo, his small hand reaching for hers, his eyes shining with an unquestioning adoration. These were the truths that fueled her song, the wellspring of her astonishing power. The music swelled her voice, climbing to a crescendo that was both exquisitely painful and breathtakingly triumphant, before finally fading into a silence so profound it felt as if the world itself had stopped breathing. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a sound, a single sharp intake of breath, followed by a quiet sniffle. Clara opened her eyes, her chest heaving, tears she hadn't realized she was crying streaming down her face. The room was a blur of astonished faces. Women in designer gowns dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. Men known for their ruthless boardroom tactics stared, visibly moved, their carefully constructed facades momentarily crumbling. Genevieve Ainsworth, the formidable hostess, sat ramrod straight, her painted lips slightly parted, an expression of utter unadulterated awe on her face. Tristan Vance and Blake Hamilton looked as if they'd seen a ghost, or perhaps had just been confronted by their own shriveled reflections. Their faces moments before alight with mockery were now pale and slack-jawed, a comical tableau of shock if the moment hadn't been so intensely charged. But the most profound reaction came from Charles Thorne. Julian's father, a man rarely moved by anything beyond stock market fluctuations or a disappointing quarterly report, sat motionless. His stern features softened his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, glistening with unshed tears. He seemed to be looking not just at Clara, but through her, perhaps, into a past filled with a different kind of richness, a different kind of song. And Julian Thorne. Julian was frozen. The smirk had long since vanished, replaced by an expression of such complete and utter stupefaction that he looked like a statue carved from ice. The world as he knew it had just tilted on its axis. The maid he had intended to break had, with nothing but the power of her voice, brought an entire room of New York's most jaded elite to an absolute tear-streaked standstill. His plot hadn't just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular, public, and emotionally devastating way imaginable. The silence stretched heavy and unbreakable. Before the first tentative clap broke the spell, followed by another, and then another, until the grand ballroom erupted in a thunderous, unrestrained standing ovation. The applause crashed through the grand ballroom like a tidal wave, a sustained roaring tribute that washed over Clara Moreau in wave after emotional wave. She stood, dazed, tears still wet on her cheeks, the borrowed diamonds at her throat, feeling less like a cold weight and more like a conduit for the astonished warmth flowing towards her from a roomful of strangers. Genevieve Ainsworth, her earlier hauteur completely dissolved, was the first to reach the stage. Her eyes, no longer icy, held a genuine, almost fervent admiration. "My dear girl," she exclaimed, her voice, though still commanding, now laced with an unfamiliar tremor of emotion. "That was not merely a performance, it was a revelation. A voice like yours. It's a crime it has remained hidden. The Ainsworth Conservatory would be honored to offer you a full scholarship, effective immediately. Every resource, every tutor at your disposal." Before Clara could fully absorb this, Charles Thorne was beside them. His stern patrician features were still softened by the lingering impact of her song. He didn't address his son Julian, who stood a few feet away looking like a man who had just witnessed his own meticulously constructed world implode. Instead, Charles Thorne spoke directly to Clara, his voice deeper, more resonant than Julian had ever heard it. "Miss Moreau," he said, a new and profound respect in his tone. "Madame Ainsworth's offer is generous, and the Thorne Foundation will gladly and fully sponsor all additional expenses. Your training, your living costs anything you require to nurture this extraordinary gift. Consider it done." Clara could only nod, a maelstrom of disbelief, gratitude, and a dizzying, terrifying hope swirling within her. A scholarship, sponsorship, a chance. A real chance to reclaim the life, the music that had been stolen from her. It was too much, too sudden. Yet it was undeniably real. Julian watched this unfold from a rapidly increasing distance, both physically and emotionally. The room buzzed around him, but he felt encased in a bubble of cold, sharp silence. His plot, his cruel, clever little plot, had not only failed, it had transformed into a launch pad for the very person he'd sought to humiliate. The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. He saw the genuine emotion on his father's face as Charles spoke to Clara, a warmth and approval Julian himself had rarely, if ever, received. So a cynical voice whispered in his mind, "It takes a public spectacle orchestrated by his fool of a son to make Charles Thorne feel something. And of course it's for the maid, not the millionaire." The gala ended in a blur for Julian. He mumbled his way through forced congratulations, for Clara endured the suddenly curious, pitying, or newly respectful glances from guests, and made his escape, as soon as decently possible. The whispers had already started, of course. By morning, the society columns and gossip blogs would be ablaze. Thorne airs joke date, steals the show, or mystery songbird, emerges at Thorne gala. Who is she? His humiliation was now a public commodity. He found Clara the next afternoon in the vast manicured gardens of the Thorne estate. She was sitting on a stone bench, not in uniform, but in a simple worn dress that somehow made her look more regal than the borrowed sapphire gown. She was staring at the rose bushes, her expression thoughtful, distant. Julian approached his footsteps unnaturally loud on the gravel path. He had replayed the previous night 1,000 times, each viewing deepening his shame and a bewildering sense of something else. Respect, he wasn't sure. He only knew he had to say something. Clara, he began, his voice hoarse. A Julian Thorne who could charm or intimidate with equal ease found himself fumbling for words. About last night. What I did. It was... He trailed off, the inadequacy of any apology starkly apparent. Clara turned her head slowly, her dark eyes calm searching. Yes, Mr. Thorne. I'm sorry, he managed the words, feeling like stones in his mouth. It was a despicable thing to do. There's no excuse. She studied him for a long moment, a silence that stretched uncomfortably. Then she asked, her voice quiet but piercing. Are you sorry for what you did, Mr. Thorne? Or are you simply sorry that your plot didn't unfold as you intended, and that everyone saw it? The question struck him with the force of a physical blow. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Was it true? Was his regret born of genuine remorse, or merely the sting of public failure and his father's palpable disapproval? He didn't have an easy answer, and her steady gaze seemed to see right through his carefully constructed defenses. I don't know. He admitted the honesty, a raw, unfamiliar sensation. Clara nodded slowly. Well, your actions did have consequences, Mr. Thorne. Unintended ones for you, at least. As for me, she paused, a flicker of that newfound strength in her eyes. I received an opportunity I never dreamed possible again. So in a way, perhaps I should thank you for your uniquely misguided form of philanthropy. She didn't offer absolution, no comforting balm for his guilt. She simply stated a truth, then rose from the bench. If you'll excuse me, I have a great many things to prepare for. Later that evening, Charles Thorne summoned Julian to his private study, a room that had always felt more like a courtroom than a sanctuary. Charles was standing by the massive mahogany desk, his back to the unlit fireplace, his expression unreadable, but radiating a cold displeasure that Julian knew all too well. Julian Charles, began his voice, devoid of any warmth you have in your infinite wisdom, managed to turn the Thorne Foundation Gala, an event meant to uphold our family's reputation for philanthropy and good taste, into a tawdry spectacle. Father, I do not interrupt. Charles cut him off, his voice like chipping ice. You brought a member of our staff, a young woman, to whom we owe a duty of care and respect to that event, with the clear intention of publicly humiliating her for your own puerile amusement, and that of your equally vacuous friends. He paused, his gaze steely. What you failed to account for, Julian, apart from a staggering lack of basic human decency, was the young woman herself. Miss Moreau, it transpires, possesses more talent, more dignity, and more character in her little finger than you and your companions have displayed in your collective lifetimes. Julian winced internally, but remained silent. Charles continued. The irony, of course, is that your idiotic plot has inadvertently done more for the Thorne Foundation's image regarding discovering talent than any of our carefully curated initiatives. The press is having a field day. You've made her a star, Julian and yourself, a rather pathetic footnote in her story." He allowed himself a grim, humourless smile. "Perhaps I should put you in charge of talent scouting more often, though your methods are unorthodox and morally bankrupt." The sarcasm was biting. However, Charles's voice hardened again. "This episode requires more than just my disapproval. Your allowance will be suspended indefinitely. The keys to the apartment in Monaco and the chalet in Aspen are to be returned to my secretary by noon tomorrow, and starting Monday, you will report to Mr. Henderson in the acquisitions department. Not as an executive, Julian, as an intern. You will learn the value of actual work, of responsibility from the ground up. Perhaps then some of this Thorn arrogance might be replaced with a little Thorn integrity." This was not a suggestion, it was a decree. Julian felt a wave of rebellion, of indignation, but one look at his father's implacable face told him it was useless. This was his new reality. As he left the study, his phone buzzed. It was Tristan. "Thorn rough night, eh?" "Don't worry, old boy. Blake and I are throwing a commiseration party at the club. Forget the singing maid, plenty more where she came from, if you catch my drift. Come on, don't be a bore." Julian stared at the message, a feeling of profound distaste rising within him. The casual cruelty, the utter lack of understanding, the sheer, unadulterated shallowness of it all. It suddenly felt suffocating. He who had been the king of their vapid little world now felt like an outsider looking in, and what he saw made him sick. He switched off his phone. For the first time in a long time, the thought of a party of Tristan and Blake's mindless laughter held absolutely no appeal. He was at a crossroads, stripped of his usual comforts, his usual cronies, and facing a future he hadn't chosen, but had most certainly earned. The path ahead was daunting, unfamiliar, and deeply, deeply unsettling. The months that followed the Thorn Foundation Gala unfolded like two separate yet strangely resonant melodies. For Clara Moreau, life transformed into a dizzying whirlwind of rigorous study and artistic discovery. The Ainsworth Conservatory was a world unto itself, a hallowed institution teeming with prodigious talents, fiercely ambitious students and instructors who demanded nothing short of perfection. Clara, older than most of her peers and carrying the weight of a life they could scarcely imagine, initially felt like an outsider. There were moments of crippling self-doubt, days when the sheer pressure threatened to silence the song within her. She encountered her share of thinly veiled snobbery from students who'd been groomed for stardom since childhood. Their casual references to summers in Salzburg zvučali like a foreign language to her. Ah, another Tuesday morning crisis, Clara would muse internally, during a particularly dramatic outburst from a fellow soprano over a perceived slight from a professor. Apparently, the universe hinges on whether one's coloratura is sufficiently luminescent. I wonder what they'd make of the acoustics in Mrs. Higgins's downstairs laundry room, back at the Thorn staff quarters, quite resonant in its own way. But under the tutelage of Madame Genevieve Ainsworth, who had taken a keen personal interest in her protégé, and a gruff, brilliant old maestro named Signor Moretti, Clara thrived. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge, her natural talent now being sculpted and polished by expert hands. Her voice grew richer, her understanding of music deeper. And as her confidence blossomed, she found her own way to navigate the sometimes treacherous currents of the conservatory. She didn't engage in the petty rivalries. She simply worked her dedication and raw talent, slowly earning the respect of even her most skeptical classmates. With the generous stipend from the Thorn Foundation, managed discreetly by Charles Thorn's office, Leo's medical care improved significantly. He He was enrolled in a specialized physical therapy program, and for the first time in years, there was genuine hope that he might one day walk with greater ease. Clara spoke to him every evening, his cheerful voice and unwavering belief in her serving as her constant anchor. Slowly she began to use her small, growing platform. She sang at a benefit for a children's hospital, her story, carefully curated by Madame Ainsworth to omit the more scandalous details of its beginning, inspiring many. The songbird was finding her wings, and her voice was beginning to reach beyond the hallowed halls of the conservatory. Julian Thorne's new life, in stark contrast, began not with applause, but with the jarring clang of an alarm clock at an hour he'd previously only witnessed from the other side of a long night out. True to his word, Charles Thorne had stripped him of his privileges. The luxury penthouse was exchanged for a modest apartment, the chauffeur for the subway, and the leisurely mornings for the relentless demands of an intern's schedule in the most unglamorous, paper-choked corner of Thorne Industries, the archival department. His supervisor was a stern, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright, who had clearly been given no instructions to coddle the boss's son. His first few weeks were a comedy of errors, though Julian found little humor in it at the time. He, who had once commanded boardrooms, or at least pretended, to now struggled with the intricacies of the filing system and the arcane art of making a decent cup of office coffee. Right he'd muttered to himself one afternoon, after accidentally shredding an important but thankfully duplicated document. Perhaps Master of the Universe was a slight overstatement on my previous resume. More like Master of inadvertent paper-based chaos. He learned humility in an avalanche of misfiled reports and coffee stains, but slowly, painstakingly, something shifted within him. Forced to confront the mundane realities of a working day, forced to interact with colleagues who saw him not as Julian Thorne the heir, but as Julian Thorne, the slightly inept intern, he began to see the world and himself through a different lens. He started listening more than he spoke. He learned the names of the cleaning staff, the security guards, people he'd never even registered as existing before. He discovered a quiet satisfaction in completing a task, correctly, however small. As part of his father's rehabilitation program, Julian was also required to volunteer a significant number of hours at a struggling inner-city community center. It was there, amidst the clamor of underprivileged children and the tireless efforts of overworked social workers, that the deepest changes began to take root. He helped tutor children in math, a subject he'd always excelled at, but never valued. He found himself awkwardly trying to repair a broken basketball hoop, getting more paint on himself than on the metal, much to the amusement of a group of street-smart teenagers. He even one rainy afternoon found himself anonymously donating a substantial sum, from the last vestiges of his personal savings, not his father's accounts, to help the center upgrade its ancient heating system, a need he'd overheard the director despairing about. He also made a quiet, anonymous contribution to the very clinic that specialized in pediatric orthopedic therapy, the one he'd discreetly researched after learning more about Leo Moreau's needs. These acts weren't for show. No one knew. They were for something far more personal, a quiet mending of his own fractured soul. The final break with Tristan Vance and Blake Hamilton came a few months into his new existence. They'd tracked him down at the community center, arriving in Tristan's gleaming sports car, their expressions a mixture of pity and derision. "Thorne, old man, what in God's name are you doing in this hovel?" Tristan had exclaimed, wrinkling his nose at a group of children playing nearby. "Look, we get it. Daddy's put you in the doghouse. But enough is enough. We've got a table at Aura tonight, a new shipment of that vintage champagne you like." Julian looked at them, truly looked at them for the first time, seeing past the expensive suits and the practiced charm to the hollowness within. And he felt nothing. No envy, no longing for his old life. Just a profound sense of detachment. Actually, Tristan Julian said, his voice calm, "I'm busy. We're trying to fix the leaky roof before the next downpour." He gestured to a ladder and some buckets. "Feel free to grab a trowel." Or he added a hint of dry humour, the kind Clara might have appreciated, touching his lips. "Perhaps you're worried about chipping your manicures," Blake scoffed. "Don't be a bloody martyr, Thorne. This whole man of the people act is getting old. Just come out with us." "No, I don't think I will," Julian replied, his gaze steady. "You see, I'm discovering that some things are more fulfilling than vintage champagne." He actually smiled then, a genuine tired smile. "But you wouldn't understand." The ensuing argument was short, sharp, and final. Tristan and Blake left in a huff, spewing insults about his sanity. Julian watched them go a chapter of his life, closing with a quiet, decisive click. He heard later through the grapevine that Tristan's can't-fail investment had spectacularly tanked, and Blake had been publicly embarrassed at a society event for mistaking a renowned philanthropist for a coat-check girl. Small, fitting karmic retributions. Several more months passed. Clara was preparing for a significant recital at the conservatory. Julian now promoted from intern to a junior analyst, a position he'd earned, Miss Albright had grudgingly admitted, heard about it through a small notice in the arts section of a newspaper. He felt an undeniable pull to go not as Julian Thorne, the disgraced heir, but simply as someone who had been profoundly affected by her voice. After her performance, which was by all accounts breathtaking, he found himself hesitating near the artist's exit. Clara emerged looking radiant, if a little tired, talking animatedly with Signor Moretti. When she saw Julian, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then settled into a polite, professional acknowledgement. He approached, his heart thumping an unfamiliar rhythm. "Miss Moreau," he said, his voice quieter, more deferential than she'd ever heard it. "Clara, your performance. It was truly magnificent." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her tone courteous, but with a clear professional boundary. I also wanted to say," he continued, searching for the right words, "I've been doing some work with the City Youth Outreach Program. They do incredible things, but their arts funding is almost non-existent. I was wondering if you ever considered perhaps a small workshop, or even just speaking to the children there. Your story, I think it would mean a great deal to them." He wasn't asking for himself, not for his redemption in her eyes. He genuinely believed it. Clara looked at him, then truly looked at him. She saw the changes, the tiredness around his eyes, yes, but also a new seriousness, a lack of the old arrogance. She saw the slightly worn collar of his less expensive shirt. She had heard whispers, of course, about his fall from grace and his new, humbler role. "That's a very thoughtful suggestion, Mr. Thorne," she said slowly. "I will certainly consider it. Perhaps you could send the details to my manager at the conservatory." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was an opening, a recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, the man standing before her was no longer the same one who had plotted her humiliation. Respect, hard-earned and fragile, was beginning to bloom in the space between them. Julian nodded, a small, almost hopeful smile touching his lips. "Of course, I will." He paused. "Thank you, Clara, for everything." She simply inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement, before Signor Moretti gently guided her away to greet other well-wishers. Julian watched her go, a sense of quiet resolution settling within him. The path was long, but he had finally truly begun to walk it. 2 years. 2 years of relentless dedication, of soaring highs and moments of quiet despair, had led Clara Moreau to this night. The Grand Opera House, a jewel in the city's cultural crown, was sold out. Tonight was her official debut in a leading role, a notoriously difficult bel canto opera that demanded both technical brilliance and profound emotional depth. The entire city, it seemed, was buzzing with anticipation for the Moreau phenomenon, the girl whose voice had unexpectedly, almost mythically, first captivated them at a society gala. Backstage, Clara was a portrait of calm focus, though her heart beat a steady, powerful rhythm against her ribs. She adjusted the strap of her period gown, the fabric rich and heavy against her skin. She thought of her parents, their proud, loving faces, a beacon in her memory. She thought of Leo, now walking with significantly more ease, his laughter echoing in her mind. He was in the audience tonight, his eyes no doubt wide with excitement, sitting beside a beaming Madame Ainsworth. He'd made her promise to wave only to him. Just one tiny wave. Clara, he'd said, his voice serious with the importance of the request, so, I know you see me even with all those bright lights. And don't worry if you wobble on the high notes. I'll still think you're the best. His innocent reassurance had made her smile, a genuine, uncomplicated smile that had reached deep inside her. As the overture began, its familiar stirring notes washing over the hushed audience, Clara took one final deep breath. This performance was not just for herself, not just for the critics or the cheering crowd. It was for the little girl who had dreamed of singing on a grand stage, for the young woman who had almost lost that dream, and for all the other hidden songbirds waiting for their chance to be heard. Somewhere in the theatre, nestled in an unassuming seat in the upper balcony, sat Julian Thorne. He was not here as a VIP, though his family name could certainly have secured him a prominent box. He had bought his ticket quietly under a different name. He was here simply to listen to witness. The past 2 years had been a quiet revolution for him. The archival department had led to a genuine interest in the history of his family's company, and from there, a role in helping to establish and manage the Thorne Foundation's new wing for supporting emerging artists from underprivileged backgrounds, an initiative he had championed, an echo of the unexpected gift Clara had received. The work was challenging, often frustrating, but for the first time in his life, Julian felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with his bank balance or social standing. He was by no means a saint. The scars of his past arrogance were still there, reminders of the man he had been. But he was undeniably a changed man. Clara's performance that night was more than just technically flawless. It was transcendent. Her voice filled the opera house, weaving a spell of heartbreak, passion, and ultimate redemption that held every soul in thrall. She didn't just sing the role, she became it. And when the final breathtaking note faded into an almost reverent silence, the eruption of applause was deafening, a tidal wave of pure adoration. Flowers rained down onto the stage. Bravos echoed from every tier. Later, amidst the throng of well-wishers backstage, a jubilant Madame Ainsworth, a tearfully proud Signor Moretti, and a beaming Leo who immediately demanded his promised wave. Clara caught a glimpse of a familiar figure standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Julian Thorne. Their eyes met. He offered a small, respectful nod, his expression one of genuine admiration, untainted by any of his old condescension. There was a new quietness about him, a depth that hadn't been there before. When the crowd around her thinned ectu, he approached. "Clara," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "There are no words. You were extraordinary." "Thank you, Julian," she replied, her voice warm, a genuine smile gracing her lips. She used his first name, a subtle acknowledgement of the distance they had both travelled. I heard about the new youth arts wing at the foundation, she added. It's a wonderful initiative. A faint flush rose on Julian's cheeks. It felt like the right thing to do. There's a lot of talent out there that just needs a chance. He paused, then a slight, almost self-deprecating smile touched his lips. Apparently I'm better at spotting it when I'm not trying to orchestrate a social catastrophe. Clara chuckled a light, easy sound. Well, your methods were certainly unconventional, but I suppose even a misdirected plot can occasionally lead to an unexpectedly beautiful composition. The old hurt was no longer a sharp sting, more like a faded photograph, a reminder of a past that had shaped but no longer defined her. Indeed, Julian said, his eyes holding hers for a moment, a shared understanding passing between them. Leo looks well, he added, glancing towards where her brother was animatedly recounting the performance to anyone who would listen, his small voice filled with infectious pride. He just told me he's going to be an opera singer too, but he'll sing about superheroes. They both laughed, a soft, shared moment of amusement. Thank you for coming, Julian, Clara said, sincerity in her voice. Thank you for singing, he replied simply. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic reconciliations. None were needed. There was simply respect, an acknowledgement of growth, and the quiet understanding that their lives, once so cruelly and carelessly entangled, had innovative, meaningful directions. As Julian walked away, melting back into the thinning crowd, Clara watched him for a moment. The arrogant millionaire was gone, replaced by a man who seemed finally to be comfortable in his own skin, a man who had found a purpose beyond the gilded cage of his birth. And Clara Moreau, the songbird once hidden, now stood firmly in the light, her voice a beacon of hope and resilience, ready to fill the world with her music. Her journey had been one of pain and sacrifice, but it had also been one of profound discovery, of her own strength, her own worth, and the enduring power of a dream that refused to die. The scars of the past would always remain a testament to the battles fought and won, but they no longer ached. Instead, they served as a quiet reminder that even from the most cynical of plots, the most unexpected and beautiful harmonies could emerge, creating an overture of hope that promised a future filled with an infinity of new songs. The most important lesson, perhaps, was that true greatness, true character was never defined by one's station in life, but by the courage to change, the grace to forgive, starting with oneself, and the resilience to always, always find your voice and sing your truth, no matter how daunting the stage. And so Clara Moreau's voice soared, a testament not just to a rare talent, but to the enduring strength of the human spirit when faced with profound adversity. Julian Thorne, too, found a different kind of song in his own life, a quieter melody of purpose, painstakingly composed through humility and the courage to genuinely change. How often one wonders, can life's harshest, most discordant notes resolve into its most beautiful, unexpected harmonies? Perhaps within each of us lies a strength we've yet to fully discover, a quiet resilience, waiting for that one pivotal moment to finally break free and find its true pitch. This journey from a cruel, calculated plot to a fragile overture of hope has certainly stirred a great many emotions in us as we've shared it, and we imagine it may have resonated deeply with you as well. What part of Clara's unwavering resilience, or perhaps Julian's arduous path towards a meaningful redemption, touched you the most? Do you believe that profound change, like the kind Julian pursued, is always within reach, no matter the past? We would be truly honored to read your reflections and feelings in the comments below. Your insights and perspectives also illuminate our path forward, helping us craft stories that connect even more deeply with your experiences. If you have any thoughts on today's narrative that you'd like to share, or perhaps ideas that could make our future tales even more compelling, please don't hesitate to let us know. We genuinely value your voice in our storytelling community. If Clara's song and Julian's transformation have found a place in your heart, a simple like on this video would mean the world to us. And if you feel that this story of courage, forgiveness, and the enduring power of second chances could uplift or inspire someone else, we hope you'll consider sharing it with them. To continue exploring these intricate journeys of the human heart with us, and to ensure you never miss another story that seeks to find meaning in our shared experiences, please do subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell. Let's keep discovering and cherishing stories that matter together. Until next time, may you find the unique music playing within your own life, and may you always have the courage to let it play loud and clear. Take good care.